Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are opening up a file that, honestly, it feels a little bit like the plot of a slow burn sci-fi horror movie.
It really does, yeah.
Yeah,
A bit unsettling.
right. But instead of aliens, it's about petunias
Yeah.
and beetles and the very strange things happening right in our own backyards. We are talking about this concept called invasion nurturing.
Invasion nurturing. It's a term that really sticks with you, doesn't it? It frames this whole problem of invasive species in a very different, well, a very human light.
It does. It's this unsettling idea that we humans are accidentally running a boot camp for invasive species. Like,
Right.
we take a plant or an insect out of its natural home, we keep it alive in a garden or a greenhouse.
Environments where it technically shouldn't survive on its own.
Exactly, and we basically train it. We nurture it until it's tough enough to jump the fence and just take over the neighborhood.
And once they jump that fence, the rules completely change. We have to figure out where they are going next. And that is really the core mission of the paper we're diving into today.
Yeah, let's get into the source. So the paper is titled Powerful Yet Challenging Mechanistic Niche Models for Predicting Invasive Species Potential Distribution Under Climate Change.
Quite a mouthful of a title.
It is a massive title, but it covers some really serious ground. It was published in the journal Ecography in 2025. The lead author is Arola Fenollosa from the University of Oxford, but she's working with this huge international team.
Right, researchers from Denmark, Australia, Switzerland. I mean, it's a global effort for what is very much a global problem.
And the problem is prediction. Like, we know the climate is changing, we know invasive species are moving, but the tools we've been using to predict these movements, the authors are essentially saying they're broken or, at least heavily outdated.
Yeah, outdated is probably a polite way to put it. The central argument here is that invasive species break the standard rules of ecology. They are moving targets in a world that is also moving because of climate change. So the static maps we've relied on for decades, they just aren't cutting it anymore.
Okay, so let's establish the baseline for the listener. If I'm a park ranger today or a land manager, and I want to know if some nasty weed is going to invade my territory, what tool do I usually reach for?
You would almost certainly use what's called a correlative species distribution model, or SDM.
An SDM. Okay, let's unpack that, because my understanding is that an SDM is basically just a really big statistical matching game.
That is exactly what it is. Think of it kind of like a streaming service algorithm. You watch 3 sci-fi movies, so the algorithm just assumes you like sci-fi.
Right.
It scans its entire library for other movies, tags sci-fi, and recommends them to you. It correlates your past history with your future possibilities.
So out in the wild, the model looks at a beetle and says, you live in a rainy, mild forest in Japan. Therefore, you will definitely like a rainy, mild forest in Oregon.
Precisely. It correlates the species' current location with environmental data, rainfall, temperature, soil type. And honestly, for a lot of stable native species, that works beautifully.
Because they've been there forever.
Right. If a tree has lived in the exact same valley for 10,000 years, we know what it likes.
But the paper argues this completely fails for invaders. Why is that?
Because of something Arola and her team call the equilibrium trap.
The equilibrium trap, that sounds a little ominous.
It's a logical fallacy, really. These statistical models, they assume that the species is at equilibrium, meaning it is already living everywhere it possibly could live.
It assumes the species has basically finished exploring the world.
Yes.
Which is obviously not true for an invader. I mean, an invader is, by definition, just getting started. It's an active explorer.
Exactly. If you look at where an invader is right now, you're likely only seeing a tiny, tiny fraction of its potential. And this brings us to a distinction the authors make that I think is the absolute key to this whole deep dive.
Let's hear it.
It's the difference between the realized niche and the fundamental niche.
Oh, I love this concept. When I was reading the paper, it felt like this applies to so much more than just biology. Break it down for us.
Okay, so the realized niche is where an organism actually lives right now. It is constrained by reality. Maybe there's a huge ocean it just can't cross.
Or a predator that eats it.
Right? Or maybe it just hasn't found a way to hitch a ride to the other side of the mountain yet.
So if we use the movie analogy again, my realized niche is just the movies available on the one specific streaming service I happen to pay for.
That is a perfect way to look at it. You might absolutely love obscure 1970s French documentaries, but if they are on your platform, the algorithm thinks you don't like them. That is your realized niche.
Right.
But your fundamental niche, that is every movie ever made that you would like if you simply had the chance to see it, it's based on your internal taste, your biology, not just what happens to be on the menu right now.
So if we build a scientific model based only on the realized niche, where the invader is right this second, we're drastically underestimating where it could go.
And that is the true danger here. You might look at a plant in Spain and say, oh, it only grows in warm valleys. But maybe it could grow on a freezing mountaintop. It just hasn't had the chance to get up there yet.
And if you assume the warm valley is its absolute limit, you'll tell the park rangers up in the mountains they're perfectly safe.
And you will be dead wrong.
So if statistics and matching games are failing us because the data is just fundamentally incomplete, what is the alternative? This is where the paper proposes mechanistic niche models, or M&Ms.
Yes, M&Ms. And I cannot stress enough what a massive shift this is. We are moving from data correlation directly into first principles biology.
This is where we start talking about thermodynamics, which I have to say I do not usually associate with botany or zoology.
Well, we absolutely should, because M&Ms don't look at maps, they look at the machine itself. They treat the organism like an engine.
Like literal physics.
Exactly. They ask things like, what is the exact freezing point of the fluid inside this beetle's cells? What is its metabolic rate at 20 degrees versus 30 degrees? How much water vapor does this specific leaf lose per hour under direct sunlight?
So we aren't asking, do you live in a hot place? We're asking, at what temperature do your proteins literally start to cook?
It's a very vivid way to put it, but yes, it is about hard, physiological limits. And the beauty of this approach is that it actually allows you to predict the future.
Right, because the laws of physics don't change just because the climate does.
Correct. A statistical model cannot predict if a lizard can survive in a climate that literally doesn't exist on Earth yet, because there's no data to correlate it with.
It's just guessing.
But a mechanistic model can say, based on your body mass and your skin permeability, you will survive until the air hits 45 degrees. It doesn't matter if that 45 degrees is in a desert today or in a rainforest 50 years from now.
That just sounds infinitely more robust. It's like having the actual architectural blueprints of a building rather than just a grainy photo of the outside.
It is.
So, obvious question here. If M&Ms are the gold standard for prediction, why aren't they the standard? Why are we still messing around with the statistical ones?
That is exactly what Fenollosa and her team wanted to quantify. They conducted this massive systematic review of the entire field. They went looking for every single paper that has ever used these mechanistic models for invasive species.
And I'm guessing the pile wasn't exactly huge, given the tone of the paper.
It was tiny. 53 articles.
53. In the entire history of the field.
Since 2007, yeah. It is a drop in the ocean compared to the thousands of statistical studies published every single year.
Wow. Okay, why so few? Is it just academic stubbornness? Or is it just way too expensive?
It's what the authors call data hunger. Building one of these mechanistic models is incredibly difficult. You can't just download a spreadsheet from a government website and run an algorithm.
You actually have to do the lab work.
You have to go into the lab, you have to take a lizard, put it on a treadmill, and literally they use tiny little treadmills for this, and you measure its running speed at different temperatures. You have to stress test plants in climate chambers until they die just to find their absolute limits.
You essentially have to write the user manual for the species from scratch.
Yes, and you have to do it for every single life stage. Because maybe the adult beetle is tough as nails, right? But the larvae die if the soil gets too dry. If your model misses that detail, the whole prediction fails.
That sounds like it takes years of work for just a single species.
It does.
And I noticed in their review results, there's a pretty massive bias in what actually gets studied. It's not evenly distributed across the animal kingdom at all.
Huge bias. Over 50% of those 53 studies were strictly on insects.
Why insects? Just because they're common agricultural pests.
That's part of it, the economic drive.
Yeah.
But mostly it's because they are ectotherms. They're cold-blooded.
Oh.
Their internal state is locked to the external temperature. So it's a much cleaner physics problem. If it gets hotter outside, their metabolism speeds up mathematically. It is just easier to model.
Whereas a mammal, on the other hand.
A mammal is a physiological mess, relatively speaking.
Right.
We regulate our own heat. We sweat. We shiver. We burrow under the ground. We change our behavior. Modeling a squirrel is infinitely harder than modeling a fruit fly because the squirrel has agency. It behaves.
Yeah.
That complicates the math entirely.
There was also a geographic bias that really stuck out to me in the data. North America and Australia seem to be doing almost all the heavy lifting here.
Well, South Korea makes perfect sense when you think about it. They have been absolutely hammered by invasions. Think of the cane toad, the European rabbit, the prickly pear.
True, they have a rough history with this.
Very rough. So they are highly motivated to invest the money and the time into these complex models because they're living through the severe consequences of getting it wrong. They desperately need better predictions.
Okay, so we have this mechanistic model that is extremely powerful but exhausting and expensive to build. But the part of the paper that really grabbed me wasn't just the modeling mechanics itself, it was the biological
With
curveballs.
surprises.
Right, the aha moments where the invaders just totally refuse to cooperate with our scientific expectations.
The complexities. Yes, this is where the paper really shines. It argues that invaders aren't just these static little units moving blindly across a map. They are shapeshifters.
Let's talk about the niche shift, because this seems to be where that invasion nurturing concept from the intro really comes back to bite us.
It does. For a very long time, ecologists kind of hoped that a species niche was fixed. Like, you are a tropical frog, you will always be a tropical frog no matter where you go.
Makes sense on paper.
But the paper says not necessarily. They distinguish between a realized niche shift and a fundamental niche shift.
Now, a realized shift is just expanding your horizons, right? Moving to a new place that looks a bit different but still technically fits your existing biology.
Right, you're just exploring more of your fundamental menu. But the fundamental shift, that is the truly scary one. That is rapid evolution.
Wow.
It means the invader actually changes its core biology to survive in a new climate.
So if I spend years studying this frog in its native home in Brazil, and I build my perfect, incredibly expensive mechanistic model based on that.
And then that frog invades Florida and actually evolves to handle colder winters. Your model is now complete garbage. Because you are modeling the ancestors, you aren't modeling the actual invaders on the ground.
That is wild. And the paper had a very specific villain that illustrates this perfectly, the Cape fig.
Ah, yes. Carpobrodus edulis. If you've been to the coast of the Mediterranean or out in California, you've almost certainly seen it. It's that succulent with the bright pink or yellow flowers. It forms these thick, really fleshy mats over the cliffs.
It looks lovely. I'm pretty sure I've actually taken photos of it on vacation.
Many people have, but it's an absolute ecological nightmare, and it breaks these predictive models in just fascinating ways. First off, it's a terraformer.
Meaning it changes the soil pH to suit its own needs. It basically hacks the environment.
It does. It makes the soil better for itself and actively worse for the native plants around it. But physiologically, it gets even weirder. It uses something called facultative CAM photosynthesis.
Okay, break that down for us. CAM is what cacti do, right?
Yes. Most normal plants open their pores during the day to breathe in CO2. But opening your pores during the hot day means you lose a lot of water to evaporation.
Yeah.
Cacti use CAM, meaning they open their pores at night when it's cool to save water. Now, the Cape fig is special because it can switch,
Wait, it can just switch back and forth.
depending entirely on stress. If it's well-watered and happy, it acts like a completely normal plant. But if it gets stressed or the soil gets too dry, it just switches over to CAM. It literally has a hybrid engine.
That is incredible. So a statistical map that's just looking at average annual rainfall has absolutely no idea which engine the plant is actively using on any given Tuesday.
Exactly. And on top of all that, the paper notes that the Cape figs that are currently invading Europe actually have different genetic clusters than the ones back home in South Africa.
So they've hybridized?
Yes. They've hybridized with other species in gardens. They're quite literally a new genetic entity.
So you're dealing with a shape-shifting, soil-hacking, hybrid mutant plant. Good luck modeling that with a basic spreadsheet.
It really highlights why the simple correlative models fail so badly here. If you don't account for that metabolic switch or that rapid genetic shift, you will massively underestimate where it can spread. And that is exactly why we need these mechanistic niche models. They force you to look under the hood at the actual machinery.
So what do we actually do about this? The authors admit it's incredibly hard. They admit the data is scarce and expensive to get. Do they offer a real solution? Or are we just doomed to be outsmarted by a bunch of succulents?
No, they offer a very clear framework. It's a 6-step roadmap meant to standardize how we build these things globally, so researchers aren't just flailing in the dark. It's all about making the process rigorous and reproducible.
Walk us through the critical steps. What's different about their approach compared to what people might have tried before?
Well, step 1 is defining the specific research aim, which sounds basic, but you really have to be specific. Are you modeling the survival of the larvae or the reproduction of the adult? But step 2 is the real game changer based on what we just discussed, regarding rapid evolution.
Step 2 is the source of traits.
Yes, and they argue very forcefully that you must measure the individuals from the invaded range, not just the native range.
Right, because of the evolution we just talked about.
Exactly. If you want to know where the Cape fig will spread next in Europe, do not test the South African ones. Test the European ones. They are the frontline soldiers. They might have thermal traits the home base simply doesn't have. That invasion nurturing might have already happened in a botanical garden somewhere, and you absolutely need to capture that new data.
That makes perfect sense logically, but I imagine practically it's way harder to get grant funding to fly out to the invaded zone rather than just pulling literature from the native zone.
It is much harder, but it's totally necessary if you want an accurate prediction. Then, steps 3 and 4 are about combining all that lab work with biophysical equations. This is the heavy math of energy budgets. You calculate exactly how much solar energy goes in, how much heat goes out. It's a very engineering-focused way of looking at biology.
And then they finally map it onto the future.
That's step 5, projection. They strongly suggest using high-resolution climate data, like ERA5 data, to look at microclimates, because a beetle doesn't live in an average annual temperature.
Right, it lives under a rock.
Exactly. It lives under a rock where it might be 10 degrees cooler than the air above it. You need to model the world as the beetle actually experiences it.
And finally, step 6, which I really appreciated, limitations.
Humility is key here. You have to explicitly admit what your model doesn't know. Maybe you modeled the temperature tolerance perfectly, but you completely ignored the fact that there's a local predator in the new range that just loves eating this specific beetle.
So physics can tell you if it can survive, but ecology tells you if it will.
That is a fantastic way to frame it. The mechanistic model gives you the fundamental possibility, the fundamental niche, but reality is always going to be messier.
So bringing this back to the real world for you listening right now, maybe you're worried about invasive species in your local state park, or maybe you're just interested in how the cutting edge of science works. When do we actually pull the trigger and use these complex M&Ms? Is the paper recommending we just burn all the old statistical models?
Not at all. The authors are actually very pragmatic. They don't say throw away the old models. They say use the right tool for the specific job.
Okay, so when is the M&M the right tool?
2 main scenarios. 1, predicting range shifts under climate change. When you are dealing with novel climates that literally have no historical precedent, statistics will lie to you. Physics won't.
Because if the world is getting hotter than it has been in human history, you need a model based on biological heat tolerance, not historical maps.
Exactly. And the second scenario is early-stage invasions. When a species has just arrived off a cargo ship, it's only in 1 or 2 spots. You cannot build a statistical trend line from just 2 dots on a map. It's statistically impossible.
Right, you don't have enough data points to correlate anything.
But you can take those few invasive individuals into the lab, figure out their thermal limits on a treadmill, and reliably predict where they might go next. The M&M works beautifully when you have almost no geographical data.
But if a weed has been established for 50 years and is literally everywhere,
Just use the statistical model. It's faster, it's way cheaper, and it's probably accurate enough because the species has already settled in. It's finally reached that equilibrium.
it feels like the real future of this field is hybrid.
It absolutely has to be. We cannot put every single beetle on Earth on a miniature treadmill. We don't have the time or the money. The paper ends with this really strong call for cross-disciplinary work. Ecologists need to stop working in their own little silos.
They need to sit down with the physicists to understand the thermodynamics.
And with the geneticists to understand the rapid evolution.
We're basically trying to solve one of the hardest math problems on the planet, predicting the behavior of living, breathing things in a completely chaotic climate system.
And we're trying to do it while the variables are changing every single year. It's not easy, but this framework really gives us a fighting chance.
Before we wrap up, I want to circle back to where we started today. That phrase, invasion nurturing.
It really changes your perspective on gardening, doesn't it?
It genuinely does. We tend to think of botanical gardens or, even our own houseplant collections as these benign, highly protective spaces. We think we're conserving nature or just decorating our patios.
But in the context of this research, we are effectively running gymnasiums for invaders.
We are the training wheels. We keep these species alive artificially in climates where they would naturally freeze or dry out, giving them just enough of a buffer to mutate, to adapt, to essentially learn the local conditions.
And then, when they are finally strong enough, They leave the gym, and they're so much better prepared to conquer the wild than if they had just arrived fresh off a boat yesterday.
It's quite a paradox. The act of caring for a species might be the very thing that weaponizes it against the local ecosystem. It suggests we really need to be a lot more vigilant about what kind of adaptation is happening right under our noses in our flower pots.
It suggests that the line between an exotic garden plant and a future ecological disaster is much, much thinner than we like to think. Perhaps we need to be monitoring our gardens not just for beauty, but for biology.
Definitely something for you to chew on the next time you water your non-native ferns. Are they just resting on your windowsill or are they actively training?
Indeed.
Well, that is it for this deep dive into the complex, wildly data-hungry world of invasive species modeling. It's a dense topic, but one that undeniably matters more every single year.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you to the listeners of this episode.